So I was saying we would go to the land of beauty, almost to air our brains after containers and igniting batteries. We're going to talk about the transport of fine art with 4 topic experts, not necessarily insurance experts. I have with me Irène BARNOUIN, your Technical Director of Fine Arts and Specie at WILLIS Towers, France. I might say, yes, your microphone is working. Formerly Grâce à Voix. You might know that Grâce à Voix was highly specialized in that. You have beside you Mathilde DUTHOIT-MICHELET, your Fine Art and Specie underwriter at QBE France. Absolutely. Emmanuel, your Executive Adjuster, International Fine Art and Specie at SEDGWICK, France. And you also have Benoît, CEO of Transport CHENUE, a company which, as we'll see, is specialized in warehousing, packaging, transporting, and hanging fine art. So it's a small market. They all know everything. They prepared the whole thing without me, but it's a whole world that we'll get a glimpse of. Let me start first with basics of this world with a layperson's question. You know, I like that. Emmanuel, what is fine art, in fact? Well, fine art, there are many definitions, some very specialized, others more concrete. In general, art historians classify arts like biological species depending on techniques and time periods. Now we have more strict definitions in France with the Intellectual Property Code, Article 211, that says that a fine art work needs to be made by an artist, also representing the characters. And Article 98 of the Tax Code specifies what are artworks, a painting that needs to be by the artist's hand, or also other multiples like tapestries limited to 8 copies or sculptures. But beyond its formal and technical properties, a work of art, although it's a bit pretentious, it also needs to bring the beholder, at least cause a moment of introspection. That's one of the things that we ask art to do sometimes. Why is there a lot of transport of fine art? Why is that a topic? Well, there would be no dissemination of culture without transport of fine art. Since prehistory, we've been transporting works of art, so flints or pearls, and closer to us, if you look at the Renaissance, or more recently 1453, the fall of Constantinople, which were major transfers of culture, only talking about the West, of course, with the dissemination of knowledge and techniques and changes in materials and possibilities to produce art. So transport is sort of intrinsic to art, and we can illustrate that with the slideshow. Maybe I can click through the slides. So yeah, I went a bit too far. So in a word, what's the time period and what's that showing? That's a fairly rare drawing. It's a technical drawing that was produced by soldiers around 1795, asking the question of how to transport antique sculptures in good conditions, because imagine that these are questions which for CHENUE are your bread and butter, but technically and economically, this is something that is almost part of state sovereignty. Imagine Cardinal de Richelieu when he bought his first collection in Italy in the 17th century. The convoy from Rome to the city of Richelieu in central France that he founded and the castle that he built. It took 2 years to transport the artworks on sleds, not with wheels, but you've got epic descriptions of the transport and crossing mountain ranges on these sleds. And here it's interesting because it's backed by a text that wonders about the diameter of the wheels to cause as little damage and vibrations and jolts to the carriage as possible. And this is something that was imagined by military engineers. So they got the cannons out of the cart to put artworks on it. Why is transport insurance now a real issue? I'm turning to insurance specialist now. Well, insurance transport is a real issue now. It used to be the case already, because I disagree with all insurers. Major risk for a fine art insurer is transport risk. We prefer aesthetic risk, in fact. That might seem a bit outrageous in this audience, but fine art is warehoused and exhibited and transported to go from point A to point B, but we prefer places where they are and never move. There's a lot of transport involved to disseminate culture in the life of a piece of art for digitalization to be processed or restored. So you have to adapt your insurance to that, offering clou à clou, as it's called in French, from one hanging place to another hanging place, including transport, the stay, and then transport back to another hanging place. That's number one. And then transport and insurance of fine art, because this is something that didn't really exist until marine insurers took a look at it and approached us, because they didn't really know who to entrust with that. And so in France, it was structured because we had to transport the Mona Lisa to Japan. We had to find someone to do that. When was that? 1972. That started in 72. In France, the structure of supply really happened at that moment. But so marine insurers spun that off around the 70s into a specific business for it to be organized. What's the size of the market? It's tiny. Well, what we could add is that when you're talking about insurance for fine art, this is really damage insurance only, all right? When Mathilde was talking about transport, we reckon that for damage, we've got 40% of damage that is really caused during transport. But to you, transport, that might seem a bit odd. It's not just the moment when the work is transported from A to B, but also the packaging, the observations on the condition, restoration, intermediate transport, and all the warehousing and all that. The shippers are involved in that. So it's not just the transport itself. So there's roughly 40% of damage happening during that period. That's number one. And then secondly, maybe, a large amount of the damage is only partial. So damage that requires an amount in terms of restoration that is fairly small. Very little total loss. We'll see that with Benoît, who's professional throughout the chain in its entirety, and as soon there's a total loss. And so the total amount is the approved value that is paid, and for partial damage is the restoration and the depreciation, the loss of value after an insured loss. So Benoît, how's that organized? There's another picture. I've stolen the clicker. When is that? That's an interesting illustration. 17. It's better to look in front of you because of the microphone. 1798, that's the arrival of the big convoy of the works seized in Italy after the Tolentino Treaty in 1797. What's interesting on this engraving is, well, what do you see? You see boxes, crates. Although you can see the horses of Venice that are outside of their crates, but what was shown to the Parisians were the crates on which it said the name of the work. So they celebrated the arrival of the crates, which is always a bit interesting. Here, that's an example of hoisting that's fairly interesting, of how to transport artworks in 1805. You can see that the sculptures are in sorts of coffins. Back then, the shipper really cast the sculptures into plaster, and they were transported in plaster, and it's at unpacking that you had to chip away at the plaster and sand that. Now, archaeologists sort of regret that time because it's very reminiscent, but that's the life of our work. Are you done with plaster now, Benoît? Yeah, casting is limited to some extreme situations. Now we use a whole value chain with very specific skills throughout, as was noted by Irène. Transport goes from nail to nail, as we call it in French. So to unhook the work, to pack it into a crate, so we needed to design and build the crate, then move the crate in formats that are very variable, but regularly these last few days we needed some hoisting at the Château de Versailles, for instance. 10 days ago I was at the Louvre to crane out some works at night from the quay on the ground floor to the first floor. So these are crates that are 3 to 4 tons, and you need to hoist them with a crane through the first floor window. And then you need to bring the crate to the specific place where it's going to be exhibited, remove it from the crate, and then hang it or put it on a new plinth for sculptures. That's the manual part that requires packaging, handling skills as well. For one example, a packager, you need 3 to 4 years in training to really start mastering the job. A team supervisor for a hoisting operation like the one that I've described, it takes 10 years to get trained before they're trusted with an operation fully safely. So these are really specific areas, and it's all on the ground. But at the office, we also mobilize coordination teams that will supervise and plan and anticipate. Their job is to almost imagine minute by minute everything that's going to happen with a risk management eye in order to anticipate on as many scenarios as possible and what happens if. So a lot of preliminary studies and analyses. Very recently at the Château de Versailles, the crane we needed to install was a bit bigger than expected. It wouldn't fit through a door. And so at the Château de Versailles, you thought you needed to have the right dimensions, but my crate was 2 centimeters too wide, and so you need to improvise in the field. So what do you do? So we work in partnership with the curators to make the right decisions, because the decisions is theirs eventually to ask if we are going to unpack the work from the crates, removing the protection device to lift it by hand. So what happened? Did you have to cut it up? Did you unpack it or cut it up, as Irène suggested? No. We transport statues in their entirety as much as possible, so they were removed from their crates with lighter protection, and we moved that through the stairs. I've forgotten what I wanted to ask. You were talking about staff training. Is that only internal training, or are there specific courses so people are already trained in terms of artwork packaging? Well, I haven't seen any bachelor's degree. Well, there's a school called LOA that trains people from occupational training to a specialized MD in project management, logistics, and art, covering a very wide spectrum. One of the challenges we're facing is that there's a lack of recognition for the sector, so it's hard to attract profiles, but still we acquire really interesting profiles of people who are changing jobs or changing trainings. So at CHENUE, in the next few weeks, I'll have a new class made up of 2 students who studied art history at BA level, so they have that baggage, that general knowledge that is fundamental, and eventually they want a more manual, more concrete job, and so they'll start training as packagers, and then they can move on and become coordinators. So they studied general courses at university, then on-the-job training, and then they move on to a coordination job. Now, if we go back to the insurance markets, what does that mean, concretely speaking, Irène? How do you look at this transport? What does that mean it's important to say who our clients are, because these are generally clients who will guide the implications. So in our area, the complexity is that our clients are fairly diverse and varied. Of course, we have public institutions, cities, regions managing museums. You've got private museums, foundations that don't have the same prerogatives, especially on ancient works. You've got big French index companies, luxury houses, so the heritage collections that they need to transport, that travel worldwide to all their shops. You've got individuals, collectors themselves, people, wealthy people who have chalets here and there and big collections that are in the free ports in Geneva for their own reasons, or art professionals, restorers, gallerists, who have a small gallery somewhere in France, but who need to transport their fine art, or a Galerie Perrotin with branches in Paris, Hong Kong, and elsewhere. That's the real issue and the complexity. All are extremely demanding because the artworks are sacrosanct to them, because they belong to them, they want to sell them, or because they've been entrusted with something that doesn't belong to them, or it's the government itself that is the owner. As Emmanuel said, the artwork itself is important. So all the insurance products that we have are tailor-made. There is no off-the-shelf solution, but as we said, transporting a piece of art from Tours to Paris, a 40 by 60 painting has nothing to do in terms of transport with a statue that's 10 tons going from China to Hong Kong via another step. So it's a niche market that's very specialized. Coming back to transport from China to Taiwan. Okay. Yes, it does exist. Okay, well. For international transport, concretely, we understand about the crates, tailor-made, well packaged. You put them on a boat or on a train or on a plane. We've got representatives from all modes of transport. What type of shipper will you focus on? We need to manage the traditional balance between safety, quality, price, speed, maybe? Well, it's really safety, quality, and speed, lead times. If we can have road transport, we tend to prefer that. Over long distances, it's air freight. And much more marginally now, maritime, especially for exceptional artworks. Overall, our clients want mostly road or air freight. Marine is limited because it's too long. No, well, safety is well controlled, but there's an issue with the time. Keep in mind that artworks, especially for exhibitions, the aim is for them to be exhibited, and so to have as little transit time as possible. And then, where there are issues about controlling security and having continuous security, so for air freight, there are good supervision mechanisms on airports so that we have high levels of confidence about security. There can be some breakage systems with marine, but on rail, we don't have the right infrastructure to use major resources. Is it a theft risk on transit? It can be theft, but it's mostly about preserving the integrity of the work. We need to make sure that the crate is handled the right way, that there are no jolts, no humidity, no extreme heat. Otherwise, my neighbors can say more about that. Maybe I can add, because I experienced it on this continent, it also depends maybe in Europe. The marine part is not well known or little known. To ship a work from Paris to Berlin, you won't use the sea. But in Asia, given you've got Singapore, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Beijing, all those are near the sea. And so all these major cities have huge container harbors. So there in Asia, marine cargo is widely used also for works of art that could, of course, be using the land route. But land is less secure from China to Hong Kong. There you'll use boats. We saw the specificities of shipping and insurance. Maybe something don't scare us, but what about regulations? They are specific. Well, transport-specific regulations. Maybe Mathilde is the better expert. But yes, we're involved on an ad hoc basis, very far upstream and downstream in terms of certification. Two things. Concretely, we can make observations about the condition, so before the packages do their work. So it's like for a new flat that you're moving into, you have a visit with observations. Yes, and both parties need to be present. Always by two parties at the same time. Yes, it's better. For that to be valid, it needs to be done by both parties. So when the work leaves and when it arrives. In case of tragedy, of course, we'll come back to that later, these observations are necessary. And maybe you were asking me to talk about the administrative documents. Well, the main are the ATA booklets for temporary import to facilitate customs movements. That's essential. And then you need to comply with major conventions, especially CITES, the Washington Convention of 1973 that you need to know by heart, especially when you're shipping, well, recently. A story. A Tiffany set in silver in which you had ball joints made of ivory. There was a little damage and restoration could be simple, but ivory can no longer enter the US territory. So you might think you can stay in Europe. If you stay in Europe, the part, although it's American in origin, it can no longer make it onto the territory. So an administrative document, I can imagine. Mathilde, maybe we've heard the broker. Now, what about the insurer? How will they look at these status reports? How can you guarantee things? Well, we guarantee a minimum condition, but as Irène said, there are no standard products. There are expected clauses for our clients preserving the integrity and the preservation and the sustainability of the work itself for future generations. So we'll look at the nature and fragility of the work, because based on that, we'll ask for specific packaging. But when you're dealing with specialists, things are taken care of immediately. We'll also look at the provenance of the work. If it's a public or private museum, in these cases, there will be issues of the fact that the work cannot be seized. This is public property, so the insurer can never own the work whenever there's damage. There's the issue of restoration. We're talking very often of partial loss and very little total loss. We could have made you dream about artwork theft and so on, but it's not what happens on a daily basis. So it's about restoration and then depreciation. Has the work lost value or not? These are the expected clauses. And then pairs and sets, things that go in sets should follow the same course. And what you're expecting from insurers is responsiveness. Customers are demanding. Times are very short. It takes 2 to 5 days to hang an exhibit. So when the list is not final, you need to have a certificate for all lenders. You'd better be there and be there for your clients. And there's also the fact that territoriality is very wide. Art has no borders. There can be provenances that seem a bit difficult because some antiques are coming from Iraq or Egypt, and there you start asking questions. There's a big issue technically for us, which is the cumulative value, because in the same place you can have a lot of loans with different policyholders, and now artworks become very valuable. So a lot of value in the same place means a big cumulative value. So the market needs to be working with colleagues in good understanding to be able to cover the large amounts. That's a good subject for a movie. That's a good topic for a movie. The the whole collection of so-and-so's jewels or artworks. Well, I have a filmography that I can send you. There've been a lot of movies about this. Now, a tougher question. Premiums for transport. I know you can have any and everything, but how do you calculate it? Can we have a rough idea? I have a Greek vase that I want to ship to my brother-in-law in the US. How do I go about it? You need to go through a broker. Irène, then? Yes, they'll offer an insurance product, and then there's the issue of the shipper. Benoît, then? Yes, of course. 2 experts. And then an adjuster. And then an adjuster, yes. We want specialists, and that's our world. So, of course, conditions will be a bit different and a bit more favorable to the policyholder. As I said, we'll take into account the provenance and fragility of the work, its characteristics, such as its dimensions, its nature, and also the artist. And so you haven't really talked about the price. Well, yes, of course. That's the ABC. So once you start from the price, can we have a range for a product worth 100? What's the premium? If I have all the right experts, it won't be relevant because we never have isolated transport. Transport is always part of a wider set, just a component, so it's a guarantee given when the collection is insured, when there's a yearly contract, but it's not just for one-off transport because it's the biggest risk, so it would be anti-selection. So, of course, it's very difficult to have an isolated quotation because it doesn't make sense. The only thing we might add, because I'm the broker here, for transport, you've got different rates based on the fragility or lack of the fragility. Everything that's designed as fragile, if it falls, it can break in 1,000 pieces, like a vase. But an old book, even if it falls, even if it's very fragile, for insurance, it's not considered as fragile generally. It's precious and fragile. So there's fragile or not, and then is transport happening in the country where it is, in France, in Europe, or the whole world. So you've got 6 different rates. That's also why, generally speaking, it's a bit more complicated to name a premium, but rates for fine art transport, they're so low that usually we count per 1,000. So even 50 million times 0.3 per 1,000, it's not a lot. So if you all have collections, then you'll probably get transport insurance. That's a nice range then. So as we can read implicitly, there are sometimes losses. When a loss happens, how are things going? Well, always swimmingly. There are losses, but very few, as I said earlier. A few in terms of frequency, occurrence, so it's a low intensity risk. But then in terms of value, it's less spectacular than you might believe because there is restoration and the total loss is fairly limited. But we've got good examples. I was ready to click through, but yes, a few examples. So a few examples, yes, here. Here, that's something that we've worked on. I'll let Irène and then Emmanuel speak. This is a sculpture by Adel Abdesemed that was Zidane's headbutt that everybody in the world knows about. It was transported from A to B. That was exhibited at the Centre Pompidou at some point. No, the one at Centre Pompidou is bronze. This is not bronze, otherwise it wouldn't have been broken in 1,000 tiny pieces. And it's during transport that it was broken, not in 1,000 pieces, but it couldn't be restored. Yeah, that's a specific case. This was carved with a CMR robot. It's a robot that did it, not a sculptor, and it's in a single block. There's no assembly. And as you might see, although the picture, you can see the crate and it's the unpacking in the museum room. You can see that it's only resting on the feet of both footballers. So regarding the surface area of marble on the floor, it's less than 30 square centimeters for a 2-meter tall statue. So it's extremely fragile, but in a way, that's what the artist wanted. He wanted to have as little material as possible. That's why he used marble as a medium to represent a fleeting moment. I mean, that's his intention.
Quand on se rend compte de la...
So when we realized it was broken, so it was broken on the leg, yes. The 4 legs were broken. So when we realized it, we could see the breaking lines very clearly, and there were still some fragments in the cracks. So we thought that when the crate was put on the ground in the museum, that is when it broke, because it was so fragile. And then there were some safety issues, because it would collapse completely if we removed the crate. And so we needed to consult with the curators also for the exhibition, because this was actually the headline of the exhibition. So we had a meeting with the surveyors, and here you can see David Led, who was the person who restored Samothrace's victory. And so we needed his expert's opinion to confirm that this sculpture could not be restored. So that was a total loss. So this is from the same artist, so maybe we need to avoid him. Yes, maybe we will no longer insure him. So we can see that there's an issue. Could it be restored? So there was a first restoration, and just to hide what was broken. So the exhibition could still take place. And then in a second stage, we tried to reassemble the fragments, but the result was not really conclusive. So that was an important loss. So here, that's quite interesting. It's a counter-example. Sometimes the packaging is quite important as well for the gallery owner, and sometimes you can have an important loss just for the packaging. It's because when unpacked, the gallery owner wanted to sell both the packaging and the work of art, but the package was just ripped off. There was a claim just for the packaging. And in 2021-2022, when the Arc de Triomphe was wrapped, it was 142 million euros worth of expedition of shipment fees by the post for a work of art that was weighing several tons. So this is a sculpture that we needed to restore urgently. And here you can see another damage on a piece of jewelry, because we have a lot of transport domestically and internationally for pieces of jewelry. And here we managed to prove that the damage was before that claim, and so that the ring had been sold already damaged. Well, I think that we've laid the foundations well. So what are the upcoming challenges for your niche business? Because we can feel that it's quite cross-cutting, Benoît. Well, as in any ecosystem, things are moving, but we're really talking about CSR a lot. Because in our introduction, as we said, works of art travel a lot. The environmental impact on the exhibition is, first of all, the visitors and the trips, the traveling of visitors. But we work on the crates to make them smaller and lighter, to have a lesser impact on air transport. We try to have various works of art traveling at the same time. And this is really a challenge because we need to face quite a conundrum with cost and environmental protection. Because sometimes curators will ask us to make crates more sustainable, and then for the next exhibition they're going to ask for single-use crates. And so sometimes we have to adapt fairly quickly. So it's quite paradoxical. So what happens to your crates afterwards? Well, our crates can go to several places. The most degrading one is destruction. So that's for wooden crates. So then they are destroyed and recycled. Second option is reusing them to transport other works of art. And the third option, which we initiate fairly recently, recycling them to turn them into furniture, small tables, bookshelf, etc. And so do you sell them at the end of the conference? Well, joke aside, I saw some in a building in Saint-Denis, north of Paris. But I don't know if we can buy it easily. Well, there's always a possibility. There's always a way. So how do you experience these changes? So before you ask yourselves if you're going to use river transport to divide by 5 or 10 CO2 emissions, what kind of assessment do you conduct? So I think that the priority is the work of art, because as Mathilde explained, the goal is to preserve these cultural goods for our future, for future generations. But the environment is now at the same level. There's no denying it. So as Benoît said, for quicker transport, we're going to favor road and air transport. So this is what we're going to use mainly for works of art. And rail transport is still not an option for us. But I think that maritime options could be further developed. We were approached by a city in the north of France connected to the Seine River. So which city was it? Rouen? Well, we checked it before lunch. So we could imagine that we could have these these works of art transported on the Seine River, maybe twice a month on sailing boats. So I think that this is something that we could develop. And you could also imagine a museum in Paris with museums in ports that would like to be more environmentally friendly. And so is looking to use a maritime transport more, maybe to go from Trocadero to Dunkirk. Why not? Dunkirk, La Rochelle, Toulon? So that's a change. Yes, absolutely. And I think that this is something that we are going to see more and more. But for an exhibition at the National Gallery in London, and then Musée d'Orsay in Paris, and then at the Met, in that case, I don't think that we are going to use container ships today because it's worth 1 or 2 billion euros, and it's just not fast enough. So it's also down to our clients. So we can become an insurer who is greener with our net zero objective that we set at QBE. And we can also include it in our CSR to make sure that we are really aligned with it. And then we can support clients with the right insurance product to guarantee their greener choices. So that could be with maritime transport, for instance, for clients that have works traveling from Europe to America. So we can see how we can have other options, making sure that we can protect works of art at the same time. So maybe an option would be to have some facility to screen photos of works of art and not necessarily transporting them. Well, I think that we need some magic, and we need to see the works themselves and not just reproductions, because at the recent Van Gogh exhibition, we could see it from the side to see the different layers of material. That's really magic. And it's also important to be able to share these fees and responsibilities, to have surveyors on both sides of the Atlantic, for instance, without having to travel back and forth. So we can have counterparts on the other side of the Atlantic. But I'm sure that you all know Art Explorer, Frédéric Jousset's catamaran that is sailing on the Mediterranean, and you can go there and see the works of art with a mask. It could be quite nice. So, so I was just teasing Emmanuel, but so I know that this is something that we are thinking of. There are various places in Paris where Van Gogh's works are screened, but I understand that the expert in you and the art history expert is not does not agree with that. Well, quite the opposite. I think that we need to follow our changing times, but it would be another way to enter the work itself. So we are now reaching the end of this roundtable. So what would be a key takeaway that you would like to share? You mean from a broker's point of view? So, well, or just from your own point of view? So in our business, the most important thing is to support our client in their risk management, depending on the goods that they will transport and exhibit from point A to point B. So we need to offer something that is tailor-made, specifically tailored to their needs. And I need that we need to find the right answer, the right response to this. Well, I would invite you to come and talk to me to see what we can offer. Because we're really passionate about this, and I think that 40 minutes was not long enough. Well, from a surveyor's point of view, in the context of transport, so it's still about expertise, whether it's before transport or after a loss. But with you all, we can play the role of an ombudsman with clients and with shippers. And I hope that the role of a surveyor will still be needed, at least as an ombudsman. Well, at our company, what's most important is the notion of trust for all players. It's also a lot about confidentiality. We haven't mentioned it, but for many clients, the issue of confidentiality is really sensitive. And it's also about reputation, because at the end of the day, it requires a lot of commitment. And so the underlying risk for the reputation is also very strong. So I'd like to add a few concluding words. It was very interesting to prepare this roundtable with you, and it was great to see such passion and how long, and how much time you can spend talking about a single work of art. So it's great to see so many passionate experts So I didn't ask you to describe your backgrounds, but I think that there is no coincidence. And so thank you so much for sharing this passion with us.